Margaret stood at the head of her dining table, watching her family enjoy the pot roast she'd spent all afternoon preparing. At 72, these Sunday dinners meant everything to her. Her son Daniel sat beside his wife Victoria, both smiling. In that secretive way that made Margaret's heart flutter with anticipation, Victoria clinked her glass, and the room fell silent. "We have wonderful news," Victoria announced, her voice bright with excitement. "We've sold our apartment, and we're moving into Margaret's house tomorrow." The room erupted in cheers. Daniel beamed at his mother, clearly expecting her to share their joy, but Margaret felt her world tilt. She carefully set down her fork, reached for her napkin, and dabbed at her lips. Her hands trembled slightly as she processed what she'd just heard. "That's quite a surprise," Margaret said softly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Victoria continued, oblivious to Margaret's reaction. "We thought it would be perfect. You have all that space, and we can save money for our future. Plus, you're getting older, Mom. It'll be nice to have us around to help you." Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest. Getting older. As if she were some fragile thing that needed managing, she looked at Daniel, her only child, the boy she'd raised alone after his father passed away 30 years ago. The man she'd supported through college, whose wedding she'd paid for when he and Victoria were just starting out. "When exactly did we discuss this arrangement?" Margaret asked, her tone calm but pointed. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we thought. I mean, it's your house, Mom, but it's also the family home. We figured you'd be happy to have us." "I see," Margaret said. She took a slow breath. "And where exactly will you two be sleeping? In my bedroom? Or should I be the one sleeping on the street?" The last words came out sharper than she intended, but the truth had a way of cutting through pretense. Victoria's smile faltered. "Mom, we didn't mean, don't call me Mom," Margaret interrupted gently but firmly. "I think we need to be clear about what's happening here. You've made a major life decision that involves my home, my sanctuary, without consulting me. You've sold your apartment, putting me in an impossible position, and you've announced it publicly, so I'd feel pressured to agree." The room had gone completely silent. Daniel's face flushed. "We thought you'd be happy. We're family." "Family respects each other," Margaret replied. "Family communicates. Family doesn't ambush each other at dinner parties." She stood, slowly, her dignity intact despite the betrayal she felt. "I'm going to bed now. When I wake up tomorrow, I expect the situation will be resolved. You both have a month to make other arrangements." As Margaret walked toward her bedroom, she heard Victoria whisper urgently to Daniel. She caught fragments, "Ungrateful and selfish old woman." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She thought about the years she'd spent building her life, maintaining her independence. She'd worked as a librarian for 40 years, saving carefully, paying off her mortgage, creating a home that was hers, and now her own son had tried to take it from her. But Margaret wasn't just hurt, she was angry, and she was going to do something about it. The next morning, Margaret called her lawyer, Howard, who'd been a dear friend for decades. "I need to make some changes to my will," she told him, "and I need your help with something else." 2 weeks later, Daniel and Victoria came to the house for what they thought would be a reconciliation dinner. Instead, they found Margaret sitting with Howard and a notary. "Please, sit down," Margaret said, her voice pleasant but businesslike. "Mom, what's this about?" Daniel asked nervously. "This is about Clary," Margaret replied. "Howard has prepared documents showing that my house is held in a trust. Upon my death, it will go to the local women's shelter, where it will be used to house women escaping difficult situations. Women who need a sanctuary, just as I have needed mine." Victoria gasped. "You're cutting us out completely?" "Not complete," Margaret said calmly. "There's a fund for Daniel's children, should he have any. But the house? The house is mine until I die, and then it will help people who truly need it." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was thoughtless. Victoria and I got caught up in our plans, and I didn't consider your feelings. Please, can't we fix this?" Margaret softened slightly. This was still her son, despite everything. "Here's what we're going to do," she said. "You and Victoria will find your own place. If you genuinely want a relationship with me, you'll call before visiting. You'll respect my boundaries. And maybe, in time, I'll remember why I loved being your mother." She paused, looking at her son with both sorrow and hope. "But Daniel, you need to understand something. Love isn't about convenience or inheritance. It's about respect, consideration, and genuine care. You forgot that. Don't forget it again." Daniel nodded, shame and understanding crossing his face. Over the following months, something shifted. Daniel and Victoria found a modest apartment across town. Daniel started calling Margaret weekly, actually asking about her life, rather than just updating her on his own. Victoria wrote a heartfelt letter of apology, acknowledging how entitled and presumptuous they'd been. Slowly, carefully, Margaret began to forgive. One Sunday, 6 months after that fateful dinner, Margaret invited them over. She'd made pot roast again. As they sat together, Daniel reached across the table and took his mother's hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for teaching me what I'd forgotten, for standing your ground, for still loving me enough to give me another chance." Margaret squeezed his hand. "That's what mothers do, sweetheart. We love you, but we also teach you. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the most important ones." They ate together, the food tasting better than it had in months. And Margaret felt something she hadn't felt since that terrible announcement. Peace. She'd protected her sanctuary. She'd stood up for herself. And in doing so, she'd taught her son what real love looked like. It wasn't about grand gestures or convenient arrangements. It was about respect, boundaries, and the courage to demand both. As the evening ended and Daniel and Victoria prepared to leave, Victoria hugged Margaret tightly. "I'm sorry I called you selfish," she whispered. "You were anything but. You were strong." Margaret smiled. "We're all learning, dear, every day of our lives." After they left, Margaret sat in her living room, surrounded by the books and memories she'd collected over 7 decades. Her house was still hers. Her dignity was intact. And her relationship with her son, though tested, had emerged stronger. Sometimes, she reflected, the greatest act of love is teaching someone how to love you properly. And that lesson, however painful, was worth learning.